Aloha aina, and welcome to Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's future, brought to you by the Koani Foundation. I'm Ehukekahu Cardwell, and here we are today at Kamakawiwo, the Center for Hawaiian Studies at the University of Hawaii on the island of Oahu, in our never-ending search of what it takes to change armchair observers into active participants to create a brighter future for Hawaii. So if you're curious like we are, come on along with us today as we visit with a very special guest, none other than Professor John Kamakawiwo Osorio. John, aloha, welcome to the show.
Hi.
It's great to have you on the show. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much.
You're somebody we wanted to have on here for a long time. You're quite an accomplished individual. You're a professor here at the Center for Hawaiian Studies, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Tell us about that. Tell us what you teach here.
You want to hold on to that microphone?
I'll be happy to. Unless my arm gets tired, then I'll ask you to hold on to it.
Okay. I'm an associate professor here, and I'm currently the director of the Center for Hawaiian Studies. So
wow.
I really do a lot of administrative work now, and supposedly I don't teach as much as I used to teach. But I'm a historian. I was trained as a historian and got my PhD and MA in history, and my bachelor's degree in history, all at this university. And
all right here.
All right here.
Wow.
Well, it's because my focus has always been on Hawaii and the Pacific. And
yes.
There's really not a better place to be studying our own past than right here.
Yes. Isn't it interesting that it's come full circle, though, because you got your education here and now you're the director of the Center for Hawaiian Studies? Yeah,
it's very interesting. And matter of fact, I continue to wonder at my incredible fortune and the way my life has gone. I've certainly had more than my share of blessing, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I teach primarily history courses. I teach a course on on law and history. I have taught courses in myths of Hawaiian history, basically looking at how Hawaiians have been described by a number of other, mostly Haole commentators.
Foreign cultures.
Foreign cultures.
Yes.
I've taught. One of my favorite courses has always been post-contact chiefs. That's what we called it. But actually, it's a history of the kingdom of Hawaii. So from Kamehameha to Liliuokalani.
Yeah.
It's been a great course to teach just because the individuals that we explore in this course are remarkable Hawaiians. Just incredible role models, not just for the people, not just leaders for their time, but leaders for our time as well.
Wow, amazing. How many years have you been teaching here, John?
Let's see, I figured that out. 12 years. I started here in 1993. Mm-hmm. It's 05 now, so I've been here for 12 years. And I was at community college for a few years before that. I've been teaching a long time.
Well, and you got your doctorate in?
In history. Yes. Here at UH while I was teaching here.
Wow.
When I signed on, I was what they call ABD, or all but dissertation. Mm-hmm. And I was teaching at that time in a tenure track position at Kapi'olani Community College. And if I had stayed there, I wouldn't have had to finish the dissertation, wouldn't have had to publish anything.
Wow.
And coming here was kind of being offered the chance to come here, really confronted me with the choice of, well, how do you want to, what kind of professor do you want to be? Do you want to be an instructor, someone who, basically spends most of his time in the classroom? Or do you want to be a researcher too? And do you want to finish this dissertation? Do you want to publish?
Yeah, very good.
And so coming here was kind of making that choice.
John, what got you interested in history, and particularly the history of Hawaii?
That's a hard question to answer. I think I've always been interested in history in general.
Mm-hmm. Even from a young kid?
Yeah, especially when I was young. I grew up in an elementary school where really the Hawaiians were sort of vastly outnumbered. In Hilo, most of the other students were Japanese or Chinese, and there were only a few Hawaiians in the school itself. But I also I grew up in a family that was, very much attached to education. My grandmother was a fifth grade teacher, full-blooded Hawaiian woman. She was sort of unusual for that particular period of time for Hawaiian to be in the public school system. Many Hawaiians
in a position of authority.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they, between my parents, my grandmother, and my older brother, who was just pretty much a genius and intellectual, just loved reading. I learned to love reading, and I read all the time. I wasn't much of an athlete, so, when other kids were out playing baseball in the afternoon, I was in my bedroom or in the kitchen reading a book, usually about war.
So instead of lifting weights, you were lifting books.
I was lifting books. I was reading, and I read all the time. I read in math class. I read in, you'd have your math text up here, and I'd have a history text behind it, and I'd be reading.
So instead of the comic book, you had the history textbook.
I had history textbooks. I was really I don't know whether that's a nerd, geek, or I can't remember exactly what the terminology is.
I'll tell you what it sounds to me like. It sounds to me like you were raised in an atmosphere, in a home that really valued education.
Well, they really did. The conversations around our table were always really interesting. My father was a politician, really from the early 1960s. And he was involved in local politics, ran and won as a county supervisor a couple of times, ran for the equivalent of mayor, and lost real narrow elections in the early 60s. So there were, we were interested in politics. My mother was very, very intelligent and had a really dynamic kind of mind and curious about a lot of things. And so at the dinner table, there were always conversations about what was going on. One of the things I also learned really early on was just the strange kind of position that Hawaiians were in.
Yes.
Here was my father. He was a successful businessman and a good politician. He was also a Republican.
Wow.
Yeah, a Republican.
That's pretty rare.
Well, at the time, it wasn't rare for Hawaiians to be Republicans, and that's a kind of a legacy of Kuhio and kind of the way in which Hawaiians tried to hold on to political power during the territory. And you got to remember that my father, came of age in the territory.
Yes, you're right.
But one of the things that was real interesting about it was that the people that were essentially his constituents outside of the Hawaiians were, fairly well-placed Haole people on Hawaii Island. And I always remember the way they sort of looked at us and treated us.
And how was
as
that?
Kind of junior members of the clan. You
Yes.
know, there was a tremendous amount of condescension and patronism, that really emanated from them. And I was always sort of reminded of that whenever we would go and visit these people as part of his campaigning, just the way we were looked at and treated. And it was mild. It wasn't really overbearing. It certainly wasn't the way the British acted in India or the Solomon Islands. But
you
was
felt it's
unquestionably
just
there.
Yeah, unquestionably there.
And we sort of grew up, sort of thinking about this in terms of who we are. My whole family was this way, kind of defiantly Hawaiian. We were raised to be, for instance, we weren't supposed to speak pidgin like so many of our friends did. We were supposed to keep our eyes on the prize and follow up in school and get a higher education and go on and make something of ourselves, very much in the kind of the Haole way. But my father always would say things like, you should never forget who you are, never forget that you're Hawaiian, remember that you owe something to the Hawaiian community. He would speak like that without it ever being really clear to us what exactly it was we owed,
Defiant Hawaiian, I like that term. What effect did that have on you when he said those things to you?
I think it just kind of puzzled us early on, and it wasn't until we got older that we began to understand kind of the way he was. My dad sort of lived in both worlds with, one foot in the business community and really pursuing success. The other foot, though, was very firmly in the Keaukaha community in which we grew up. It's Hawaiian homes. It's a Hawaiian homes area, and people would come by all of the time, and they would talk. Hawaiians would come by. They treated him as one of their own, and that's how he acted toward them as well. He never, he never behaved as though he were trying to distance himself from that community. He always felt as though he were a part of it, but he never apologized for the things that he did in his life as well, the ways in which he reached for success. And Hawaiians are like that. I mean, as I grew older, I began to understand, being Hawaiian is a really interesting kind of thing, because on one hand, we very much cherish our community with one another. On the other hand, we're very proud, pragmatic, and competitive people as well. And no Hawaiian likes to think for a moment that we've been bested by the Haole or by the Japanese or the Chinese for 1 minute. We're in there to be competitive with them. I think all of his children grew up with that kind of spirit, just very, very proud, and very proud of being Hawaiian.
Yeah, that's great. You know, I find that very interesting, because as you were saying this, I was sitting here thinking, you know, this could have gone either way, meaning that it's always possible for a person to go through as a childhood what you described and adopt a poor me attitude, a why me, and kind of stay there. But instead, you were curious, you were interested in history, how things came to be, and it almost sounds to me like you also had this other element to it, which is, so where do we go from here? Where do we take this next? Yes?
Yes, when I think of my brothers and sisters, this generation of Osorio, I realize in a lot of ways there was something we didn't get from my father, which my father always had the belief that, and continues to, even though he's more than 80 years old, that it was his kuleana to lead Hawaiians to another place, to a better place. I think that he always felt that was a part of his mission in life.
Wow.
And because he chose politics as a Republican in the time that he did, unfortunately he wasn't, he didn't really have that kind of opportunity in politics. Once the Democrats, began to take over in the early 60s, my father and his party sort of fell behind, fell out of favor.
Yes.
And, he would not change parties, my dad. Even though, I always wondered what a strange Republican he was. He was really strongly pro-union. He had such a compassionate, soul for such a long time. It just seemed really odd. He refused to change parties, and so he only once in 1990s was finally elected back into the county council and had an opportunity to serve that way again. But it didn't stop him from pursuing service and leadership, through civic, duties and civic opportunities. He, belonged to all of these different clubs. He worked really hard. He was always generous.
So he took it as far as he could.
He took it as far as he could. But his children, for some reason, and myself included, have always felt, largely as a result of his experience with politics, we don't want any part of that world. We just don't want to ever get too close to that kind of, having to appeal to the public to let us serve you. We all prefer to serve on our own terms.
Yes, and yet you've written about politics, because
Yes,
politics is, you can't write about history without writing about politics and vice versa.
That's one of the things, is I find politics absolutely fascinating. When I see the way people behave, I see the way in which laws are made, have been made, the way in which legislatures behave, the kinds of political pressures that are very rational ones that you can actually look at and see and understand and say, yes, I understand exactly why this is happening. I find it fascinating. I find it wonderful to talk about, because, in the end you see all of the things about being human, about being Hawaiian.
Yes.
They're all sort of written right out there. The pride, the arrogance, the anger, the jealousy, but also the greatness of spirit.
Yes. Yes. I mean,
there.
all those qualities that you mentioned, again, can cut both ways. They can hold a person back, but they can also make them great.
That's
It's a
absolutely
recipe
true.
for greatness. Yeah. So your father took it as far as he could, and then it seems to me almost like the mantle was passed on to you kids, you guys.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe that we took from our dad a real powerful sense of service and obligation.
Yeah.
To Hawaiians.
Yeah.
And, I know that all of our siblings, my siblings, feel it, to one extent or another. I feel like what we have done here, what I have done here at the center, my own part in this, has been to really commit myself to the education of Hawaiian youth, Hawaiian young people, but also to hold on to and to develop our knowledge of a period of time that a lot of people just simply sort of set aside and said, this is not important, this is not significant,
Yeah.
this doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know.
So John, let's talk about that period of time right now, and I want to bring up here and show our viewers this book that you've written, which is a phenomenal book, Dismembering Lahui, a history of the Hawaiian nation to 1887. And the period, you write about a brief period of time in this book, but as you said, it's a very important period, very important period. Why don't you give our viewers, if you would, just a brief thumbnail sketch of why this period of time that you focus on in your book is so important, and what was at stake during that time for the Hawaiian people and the Hawaiian nation?
This is a real critical period of time because 1840 is the date of the founding of the constitutionally based kingdom. A kingdom that was sort of constructed under law,
Yes.
with a structure that was very Western in nature.
Yeah, completely different form of government than what went before.
Than what had existed
Yeah.
before. And if you think about the essential promise of modernism, in fact, the kinds of things that Bush is trying to hawk to the United States and to the rest of the world today, that you can actually build a nation by bringing democracy and freedom and all those other kinds of things. You bring them into a place that didn't have them before, and things will transform. One of the things that this book, looks at is the essential lie of that.
Yes.
It's not, and this is not to suggest that democracy or free expression and legislatures are bad things in and of themselves. The lie is that they will actually save the nation from
Yes.
being overrun.
Yes.
In fact, what happens is that the kingdom really greatly facilitates the takeover of the lands, the alienation of the lands, the takeover of the society and its wealth and its riches. It would be completely wrong to blame law for that. Certainly the great depopulation had much more to do with what happens to us than almost anything.
The genocide of the Hawaiian population going from about, 1.2 million at contact
to less than 40,000
Less than
by
40,000.
the time the United States took over.
about 100 years, 120 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, about
So the depopulation was dramatic. It was like an hourglass, all of a sudden shrinking down to, it's like 20 people in your family and everybody dies but you.
Mm-hmm. It's a terrible period in the sense that you can see that people have no answer for the diseases. I mean, the answer would have been complete isolation and not allow anyone else to come in, just really cut off
Which is no answer.
any particular kind of connection to the rest of the
Yeah.
world. They could not do this. So what happens is that everybody realizes that this is something that they're completely helpless to contain, the continued dying. And yet, the incredible gracefulness that Hawaiians
Yes.
really met that period with.
Yes.
They did what they could do. Missionaries promised that conversion to Christ would bring salvation and life. They converted. They continued to die. Those same missionaries essentially promised that law would protect their kingdom from being taken over. They cleaved to it. They learned it. They learned to read and write. They did all of the things that they were told basically to do, to modernize, to civilize themselves in order to to hold on to their country. And in the end, that country, it's not really a question of they lost the country. The country
Right.
was simply taken from them.
Yes.
This is very clear, that the treachery and the hypocrisy that results in the actual taking of the kingdom is a separate thing from all of the other ills that they had been subjected to that were essentially unintentional. The depopulation that comes about as disease,
Foreign diseases come in.
we understand,
Yes.
this is something that happens. Missionaries will preach. Hawaiians accepted or rejected, but in most cases accepted the teachings of missionaries. They learned to read and write. They did these things of their free choice. They did these things of their free choice. They did not lose the kingdom from their free choice.
Yes. There's two things about your book that I find absolutely phenomenal. One is that as I read the book, it seems as though almost seems as though you're talking about today, because I see the resurgence of the cycle that you describe in your book back then, 1840, 1887, happening now, what with the Akaka bill attempting to go through the U.S. Congress. And they're making promises there.
Exactly.
And then the other thing that I find so incredibly phenomenal is that even though this massive depopulation occurred, going from 1.2 million population to 40,000 in a little over 100 years, and all these other things that you talk about that happened, they survived. The culture, the people, the language, the ways, they survived, and now it's flourishing again, and you are flourishing again. And to me, it just shows the enormous power and wisdom and survivability of. I mean, if it had happened to anybody else, I mean, they would have been gone, never to return.
For this, I think we can thank our ancestors, and not just our deep ancestors of 100 generations ago, but the ancestors of 3 or 4 generations ago who made decisions, you know, to cooperate, to collaborate, to work with, to allow a certain amount of change, to move in a particular direction, but holding on to the things that they believed made us quintessentially Hawaiian. I think of Kalakaua and the way he's excoriated, really, in the press as a
drunk,
or
a playboy,
a corrupt individual, and yet, you know, he has these moments of absolute grace because of his willingness to, you know, to thumb his nose at powerful people and say, no, we will dance the hula at my coronation. Oh, yeah, we're going to do that.
It will be done publicly.
I will reach out to create a foreign policy that might make things a little fairer for, you know, for islanders when having to deal with, you know, powerful individuals like you. Even though we have no army or no navy, you know, these kinds of things. You just have to celebrate the kind of spirit and strength underneath that
Absolutely.
Kind of movement.
So, John, here's one thing that for me is really true about you, and that is you have allowed yourself to stand squarely on the shoulders of your ancestors to be able to tell their story in order to empower present-day Hawaiians, your peers, to do what they need to do to build a better future for Hawaii. And to me, that's a remarkable thing.
Thank you for saying that. I really am doing the only thing I know how to do.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. That's beautifully said.
And I think that, you know, for all Hawaiians, for all people really, to do what you know how to do and to do it the best you can is the way you protect the race. It's the way you protect the heritage.
Yeah. So for you, there really was no other option. You knew that this is your kuleana, this was your area of responsibility.
I think I was led here by a lot of people, by people like Haunani K. Trask and Lili Kalakame Lehiva and Daviana McGregor and other, you know, scholars who encouraged me and said, you know, this is a path you could take. But I also think, you know, I have been extraordinarily lucky in just the kinds of things that have happened that have allowed me to take full advantage of this education and to put me in a place where, you know, I can work and work harder than I've ever worked. It just gets, the work just gets harder and harder every year, longer and longer hours. It's amazing.
Yes, but the privilege, excuse me, the privilege also becomes more unique and larger. Yeah.
It is really a privilege, and it's one of the things you can never forget.
Yeah. John, I wanted to touch on another aspect of that, which is, you know, we have viewers both here in Hawaii and as well as around the world, but some of the viewers may be watching you here today and say, well, my goodness, the man's a PhD, he runs the Center for Hawaiian Studies. I mean, he's a very, very accomplished and well-respected individual. I mean, I'm just a little old me. I mean, I could never accomplish that. For those people sitting there saying that right now, what is your message to them?
I keep thinking about how little I know compared to Paul Maikai Crozier, who runs this lo'i, and I don't think he has an MA. He knows more about taro and about planting and about the incredible spiritual value of tarot than I will ever know. I think about other people who don't even have bachelor's degrees, kumuhula, will know more about genealogy and mo'olelo than I will ever know. And I don't even try to compare my education with theirs. I think it's, I think I'd be very, very uncomfortable if I ever sat down to really try to figure out how much I know compared to what they know. I will say this, that I went back to school, I went back to UH when I was 34, 35 years old.
Wow.
And I've been playing music for more than 12 years as a profession. Things have become increasingly difficult. You know, fewer and fewer jobs. And I thought to myself, I don't know what I'll do 10 years from now. And I thought, maybe what I should do is start to work towards something now. It didn't seem to matter that I was that old.
Yes.
My mother was in her 60s when she went back to school.
Really?
And got her master's in social work when she was 65 or 66 years old.
Wow, that's amazing.
So
it's never too late to start.
it's never too late, and you always have something to give and something to offer. I think about it this way. You can't think about it in terms of what you're doing for yourself. You have to be thinking constantly about what you can bring in service to your people. And it's remarkable how little then time matters and how little then all the work matters. You just find yourself doing it. I've seen it over and over again in students that we've encouraged in our courses. When they graduate and they go on to graduate schools and they write their letters of, their letters of introduction to get them into graduate school, over and over again they say, we want to give back. It's something that they know. It's something that they know that motivates them, that gives them the strength and the persistence and the endurance to get through this stuff. And it's the blessing itself. The work is the blessing.
Work is the blessing, yes. What a powerful, powerful message. John, thank you very, very much for being with us here today. It's been a privilege. And your message, I know, is one that has and will inspire many, many people into finding their own place to contribute. So, mahalo very much.
Aloha to you.
Thank you for being with us on Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's Future, brought to you by the Kiwane Foundation. I'm Ehuke Kahu Cardwell, and until next time, ahui ho.